It looked like just another sunrise, but beneath those golden rays lay the final countdown of a story that would shake the nation. The first light of day crept through the blinds in a quiet Orlando neighborhood, illuminating a household that seemed calm on the surface but was brimming with silent tension. From an outsider's perspective, the day was unremarkable. Birds greeted the morning in a familiar chorus, and a subtle warmth hinted at another Florida summer day. Yet for Casey Anthony, those early hours carried an inescapable gravity, though, to anyone observing her, nothing would appear amiss. She moved about her usual routine, preparing to step out into a world that would soon be transfixed by her every action. Her phone lit up with the first messages of the day, a mix of mundane and curious notes that would later become pieces of a larger puzzle. Online records show her using social media intermittently, but the exact content of her scrolling remains lost to time. She slipped into the kitchen, going through a morning ritual that felt both practiced and distant. There was no overt sign of distress, no sudden gasp, no trembling hands. If someone in the house glanced her way, they might catch a fleeting look of preoccupation. Yet without a spoken word or confession, these faint clues revealed little. Reports indicate that morning was the last time a sense of normalcy hovered around Casey's world. She left her parents' home after a brief span, perhaps under the guise of running errands or meeting friends. In actuality, the details of these moments have become part of a timeline scrutinized by investigators and the public alike. Evidence would later show her cell phone pinging in different parts of town, but from a purely observational standpoint, Casey's demeanor remained composed. She carried car keys, a purse, and an air of routine as she stepped outside. Sunlight poured over the driveway, reflecting off the windshield of her vehicle. In that fleeting moment, the day could have gone 1,000 different ways, none of which would lead to the storm that was about to break. Internally, one might imagine an undercurrent of worry or resolve, but no words or outward expressions betrayed any inner turmoil. If passersby had looked her way, they might have noticed only an everyday young woman, driving off to handle everyday obligations. The day stretched ahead, and so did a path that led to uncharted territory. Surveillance cameras in various stores or gas stations might later capture fragments of her journey. A glimpse of her face, the license plate of her car, the subtle shift in her posture. Yet these images, stripped of sound, refuse to deliver an obvious confession or reveal a hidden secret. In the swirl of early traffic, Casey's car joined countless others, lost in a sea of mundane commutes and errands. And so began a day that would later be dissected by authorities, journalists, and armchair detectives across the country. The morning painted the backdrop to an unfolding drama, with bright skies and a calm facade. No storm clouds yet marred the horizon. To outside eyes, there was no sign that these first hours held extraordinary significance. Yet each minute brought Casey closer to a dramatic pivot, an invisible countdown that would lead to irrevocable change. The sun kept rising, warm and indifferent, casting long rays across lawns and streets. Within that light, Casey Anthony's final 24 hours of relative anonymity were already slipping away. As mid-morning arrived and the Florida heat intensified, Casey's day continued in a manner that seemed deceptively ordinary. Traffic signals turned from green to yellow to red in their usual cycle, and the city around her churned with its routine rhythm. Shopkeepers opening doors, workers grabbing lunch, students heading to summer classes. She navigated these streets with a purposeful calm, stopping intermittently for errands that remain only partially documented. Phone records, later scrutinized, indicated calls to friends and sporadic text messages. These digital footprints formed puzzle pieces that investigators would struggle to piece together into a coherent picture. By this point, Casey had crossed paths with individuals who would later recount their memories and statements. To them, nothing stood out as particularly alarming. Perhaps there was a fleeting moment of unease in her eyes, but it passed as quickly as it came. She maintained conversation, though the exact words were never preserved by any microphone, and performed tasks that aligned with a typical day's chores. Photographs from surveillance cameras and local stores might show a figure strolling aisles, picking up items and placing them back, but offering no outward signal of tension. Outside, the sun was relentless, and the humidity clung to every surface. Within Casey's orbit, small decisions carried weight that she alone might have felt. Real facts suggest she met with acquaintances during these hours, though the full nature of these interactions remains partially speculative. She drove from point to point, her car's air conditioning battling the stifling heat, while city noise filled the background. The day was in full swing, and time continued to march forward, indifferent to any turmoil lurking beneath the surface. Friends who texted Casey might have received short, clipped replies. Those who caught a glimpse of her face may have registered a slight tension or a forced smile. From an external viewpoint, however, these were trivial observations, easily dismissed as the regular stresses of life. Yet in hindsight, every small gesture became loaded with significance. Did she sense the walls closing in? Was there a knot in her stomach that she kept hidden? Only Casey could know for sure, and she offered no confessions to those around her. As the afternoon wore on, the pace of life in Orlando began to shift. Schools let out, offices neared the day's end, and roads filled with a fresh wave of traffic. Casey's phone remained active, pings bouncing off cell towers that formed an electronic map of her movements. The people she encountered saw nothing remarkable, just a young woman going about her day. Yet, unbeknownst to them, each hour that passed was a step closer to the moment everything would crack open. Tensions that may have simmered within her remained invisible to the casual observer. On the surface, it was just another summer afternoon. The sun baked the asphalt, ice melted in plastic cups of soda, and car radios played popular tunes of the time. Amid all this normalcy, Casey's last hours of relative freedom were ticking away, each passing minute knitting itself into a timeline that would be dissected and debated for years to come. By early evening, the day had already accumulated enough subtle question marks to fill entire case files, though no one yet realized it. Casey seemed to be on autopilot, following a path that would soon veer irreversibly. She continued to meet people, run errands, and maintain the semblance of calm that had characterized her morning. The clock's steady rhythm offered no warning. Even as the sun began its slow descent, the unraveling had already begun, though it remained cloaked in the ordinary. As late afternoon slipped into early evening, the skies above Orlando transformed into a canvas of orange and pink, promising the city a gentle dusk. The warmth of the day began to subside, yet a certain heaviness lingered in the atmosphere. Casey's movements during these hours, captured in fragments by security cameras and pieced together from witness accounts, painted a perplexing portrait of someone on the precipice of a life-changing event. She still appeared composed, methodical even, as though following a set itinerary. Her vehicle, a white Pontiac, was a silent companion on these final errands. Parking lot surveillance may have glimpsed her stepping out or back into the driver's seat with mundane regularity. Each new location added a small entry in the log of her day. A receipt from a store, a digital timestamp from a gas pump, or a fleeting reflection in a shop window. Investigators later traced these steps, trying to glean meaning from each one, often left with more questions than answers. Even as evening approached, the phone in her pocket remained active, occasionally lighting up with calls or text messages. Some were from friends making plans, others from family members checking in. The exact content of these exchanges is partly known, partly speculative. Yet from the outside, there was little to suggest a countdown to catastrophe. The Florida skies softened, streetlights flickered on, and life carried on with its usual end-of-day routines. Those who crossed paths with Casey in these hours might have observed a fleeting seriousness in her expression, a tightness in her posture. Yet no one reported a scene or confrontation. If anxious thoughts churned in her mind, they stayed locked behind a neutral facade, revealing themselves only in subtle micro-expressions, perhaps a pause before responding to a greeting or a momentary vacant stare while waiting in a checkout line. The general hum of an Orlando evening provided a cover for whatever turmoil lay beneath. She she navigated the roads with a practiced familiarity, weaving through traffic that grew heavier as people returned home for dinner. Windows glowed in suburban neighborhoods, families gathered around kitchen tables, and the city gradually settled into its nightly rhythm. For Casey, however, these ordinary sights were the backdrop to the final hours before a seismic shift. The tension between the mundane and the impending crisis grew palpable, though it remained hidden in plain view. By the time twilight truly set in, the sense that something was about to go irreversibly wrong hung in the air like a static charge before a thunderstorm. Streetlights revealed fleeting glints in her eyes if any passerby cared to look closely. But even then, the moment would pass too quickly to register as a plea or a confession. She carried on as she had all day, moving from place to place with purposeful steps, concealing any emotional tumult behind a controlled exterior. As the last colors drained from the sky, Casey's path narrowed, funneling her closer to the crucial juncture that would soon erupt into public view. In the relative peace of an Orlando night, one might still cling to the illusion of normalcy. Yet each tick of the clock resonated louder in the cosmic scheme of what was to unfold. The final steps, though seemingly ordinary, were loaded with an unseen weight, a quiet crescendo building toward an event that would shatter countless lives and capture the nation's attention. Night descended fully, casting a veil of darkness over suburban streets that had seemed welcoming just hours before. Porch lights flickered across the neighborhood, illuminating driveways and front lawns in soft, warm hues. Behind those small lights, doors closed on quiet living rooms, and curtains drew on typical American evenings. But for Casey Anthony, this night marked the moment where all roads converged toward a singular, devastating outcome. Details become murkier here, shaped by partial witness accounts, digital footprints, and forensic timelines pieced together in retrospect. The tension, so carefully contained throughout the day, seemed poised to erupt. Yet to the naked eye, there was no cinematic moment of chaos, no raised voices, no public display of anguish. Instead, the darkness shrouded everything in ambiguity. A hush fell over the streets, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioners and the occasional passing car. In these crucial minutes or hours, Casey's whereabouts were subject to intense scrutiny. Cell phone records placed her in specific locales, while neighbors sometimes recalled the faint sound of a car engine late at night. Some security cameras, pointed aimlessly at parking lots or residential streets, provided glimpses of headlights cutting through the darkness. Yet the grainy footage never captured a definitive revelation. It merely hinted at movement and possibility. Investigators would later examine these clips frame by frame, searching for the secret that might unlock the truth. Inside Casey's vehicle, one can imagine the oppressive silence, broken only by the soft buzz of the car radio or the hum of the engine. The swirl of summer heat, even at night, lent a stifling atmosphere to this pivotal moment. If a passerby looked in her direction, they might see only the silhouette of a driver behind the wheel, face partially illuminated by the dashboard's glow. Nothing outwardly signaled the weight of the decision or circumstance she now faced. Then came the sequence of events that would leave an indelible mark on national consciousness. In the hours that followed, key details remained contested. What precisely happened, in what order, and why? But soon enough, the shape of a tragedy began to form. The incident, as law enforcement would categorize it, occurred under a thick blanket of night. No dramatic flash of lightning accompanied it, and no neighbors rushed outside in shock. The nighttime hush ensured that if there were any final sounds or last-minute revelations, they remained confined to the darkness. When the moment had passed, the world itself felt different, though few sensed the change immediately. From an external vantage, there might have been no tangible sign that everything had just fallen apart. But the stillness that followed carried a somber resonance. The roads emptied, shops closed, and the moon traced a path across the sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Meanwhile, an irreversible line had been crossed. As the earliest hours of the morning approached, Casey emerged or retreated, possibly both metaphorically and literally. leaving behind a swirl of questions that would later haunt investigators, the media, and the public. In the aftermath of this fateful juncture, the stage was set for one of the most controversial and scrutinized stories in recent American history. While the summer heat refused to relent, a chill of uncertainty settled over the situation. The final pieces of that catastrophic puzzle were now in place, waiting to be discovered and igniting a chain reaction that would captivate the nation. Morning arrived again, but the atmosphere was irreversibly changed. Word of a missing child, Casey Anthony's daughter, began to spread like a shockwave through the community. At first, the information trickled out in hushed conversations between neighbors, phone calls among concerned relatives, and quietly frantic police inquiries. Then came the media, swooping in with lights, cameras, and an insatiable appetite for a story that had all the makings of a national headline. In the earliest news segments, anchors delivered the details with measured caution. A mother named Casey Anthony had reported, or been associated with, the disappearance of her young daughter, Kaylee. The phrasing was uncertain at first, as reporters tried to confirm facts from scattered sources. Soon, local stations flashed pictures of the bright-eyed toddler on every broadcast. The child's smile, frozen in time, collided with a growing sense of dread among viewers. Even those who had never heard the names involved felt a pang of apprehension for a life so young and unaccounted for. Investigators descended upon the Anthony home, cordoning off areas and conducting initial interviews. Cameras captured the telltale swirl of red and blue lights reflecting off the asphalt. Yellow police tape formed a perimeter around the family's property, adding a tangible sense of gravity to the unfolding events. Helicopters hovered overhead, offering aerial shots of the neighborhood, while reporters provided live updates. As day turned to night, the story ramped up, overshadowing other headlines and captivating the public's imagination. Casey Anthony, previously just another young woman navigating life in Orlando, became the central figure in a media storm. She stood before cameras, occasionally flanked by family or legal counsel, though the exact words she spoke or the expressions on her face were dissected endlessly. Newscasters interpreted every tilt of her head, every quiver of her lip, as they speculated on her possible guilt, grief, or innocence. Psychological profiles sprang up overnight, crafted by pundits with minimal information but maximum audience demand. The airwaves buzzed with theories, some rooted in partial truths, others purely speculative. Every lead was magnified, every rumor escalated. In the absence of definitive answers, the world filled the void with a collective fascination bordering on obsession. News vans parked down the street, their satellite dishes aimed skyward, ready to transmit any fresh development. Microphones and cameras aimed at neighbors, passersby, and any friend or acquaintance who might reveal a fragment of insight. Meanwhile, social media ignited into a frenzy of amateur sleuthing. Forums and message boards discussed cell phone pings, forensic evidence, and the possibility of a cover-up. Outside the Anthony residence, candlelight vigils and missing person flyers became a common sight. Strangers who had never met Casey or her daughter offered prayers and condolences, hugging each other in solidarity. Others turned anger toward Casey, insisting she must know more than she was revealing. In living rooms across the nation, viewers debated the story as if it were a grisly television drama, replete with twists and turns. Cable news panels invited experts to opine on the unfolding investigation. The scrutiny felt relentless, each hour bringing a new headline, a new angle to explore. In that charged climate, the simple act of returning home or stepping outside turned into a media spectacle. Casey's life was no longer her own. Every glance from a neighbor or reporter carried both judgment and curiosity. The puzzle of the child's disappearance was now a national riddle, and Casey was at its epicenter. Even as law enforcement intensified their efforts, the world watched, poised between sympathy for a missing child and suspicion toward the mother whose role in the tragedy remained painfully unclear. Days stretched into weeks, then months, as the disappearance of Kaylee Anthony evolved into one of the most polarizing cases in recent memory. In that span, Casey Anthony's life underwent a seismic transformation. Where once she navigated Orlando's streets unnoticed, she now existed in a perpetual spotlight. Investigators combed through her car, her home, and her digital traces, seeking any clue that might unravel the mystery. The search for the missing child escalated into a county-wide operation, and volunteer groups organized search parties in wooded areas, parks, and vacant lots. As the case gained even more national traction, theories multiplied. Some believed Casey was an innocent mother caught in unimaginable grief, while others labeled her a calculating figure with something to hide. Television hosts dedicated entire segments to scrutinizing her every move. Her posture in court, her choice of words during police interviews, even her emotional reactions or lack thereof. Psychologists and body language experts were invited to analyze her, turning speculation into a form of prime-time entertainment. Then came the devastating discovery. Remains later confirmed to be Kaylee were found in a wooded area not far from the Anthony home. This development delivered a profound shock to the nation, transforming a missing person case into a homicide investigation. Yet, even this grim revelation did not provide a straightforward answer to the question burning in everyone's mind. What really happened during those final 24 hours? The autopsy results, the forensic reports, none could conclusively fill in all the blanks, leaving room for continued debate and doubt. Public interest soared to a fever pitch. Casey was charged, and the court proceedings became a media spectacle of unprecedented proportions. True crime enthusiasts, curious observers, and those seeking justice all fixated on every twist. The defense argued fiercely for her innocence, pointing to inconsistencies in the prosecution's case and the lack of definitive evidence linking Casey to intentional harm. The prosecution painted a starkly different picture, suggesting motive and opportunity. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, some in protest, others in support, all hungry for answers. As the trial concluded and the verdict was delivered, reactions ranged from shock to vindication to outrage. Through it all, Casey Anthony remained the central figure of a sprawling controversy. Long after the gavel fell, the public continued to question how justice was served or denied. Some believed the legal system had worked as intended, upholding the principle of innocent until proven guilty, while others were convinced that a guilty party had walked free. The media, for its part, reflected the rift in public opinion. Newspapers printed polarized headlines, talk radio hosts raged or defended the outcome, and television pundits extended the case into an ongoing cultural debate. To this day, the final 24 hours before Kaylee's disappearance remain obscured by conflicting accounts and incomplete data. Forensic reports can only offer partial truths, and investigators can piece together only so much from phone records, testimonies, and circumstantial evidence. Beyond the verifiable facts, a realm of speculation persists. Did Casey act alone, or were there others involved? Was there a tragic accident that spiraled out of control, or a more sinister plot beneath it all? That uncertainty fuels countless documentaries, articles, and late-night discussions, ensuring the story never fully fades from public consciousness. In the years that followed, Casey Anthony's name became emblematic of a case that both horrified and enthralled a nation. Even now, theories continue to circulate, each claiming to finally explain those crucial last hours. Yet definitive closure remains elusive. The case has woven itself into modern folklore, a reminder of how swiftly the ordinary can become extraordinary, and how one summer day in Florida can reverberate through the culture for decades to come. And so we are left with lingering questions, suspended between what we know and what we may never truly understand, each puzzle piece pointing to a truth just beyond our grasp.